This story is called The Wooden Sword. Okay, you know this one? Okay. Once there was a king. He was a very good king. He cared about his people. He cared about his subjects and what they thought and how they felt and what they needed. And one day he decided he was up in his palace all the time. He couldn't really tell what his people needed from way up there. So he decided to disguise himself. And he dressed himself as a beggar and went out from the palace and down into his kingdom. And he walked through the streets and he talked to people and he met people. And of course, they didn't know who he was, so they spoke to him as an ordinary person. And it became evening and he went into a part of his kingdom that was not such a good neighborhood, okay? It was the poorer part of town. And he made a mental note that he should have his people fix the streets. There were holes in the streets, and some of the houses were kind of ramshackle and falling down. And he made a note that he would send people to repair things and help out. And while he was walking, he heard singing. He heard a man's voice singing such a wonderful, happy song. And he peeked in the window of a house and he saw a man sitting down at his table about to eat his supper. There wasn't much on the table. There was a little bit of bread and a piece of cheese and a bottle of wine, but the man was sitting there singing joyfully. And he knocked on the door, and the man inside opened the door and said, "Oh, would you like to come in? You know, I see that you are needy. I'd love to have you come in." And the king, who looked like a beggar, said, "Oh, I don't want to bother you. I was just wondering. I hear you singing, and I'm wondering what makes you so happy." And the poor man said, "Oh, please, come in, come in. I don't have much, but I'll be happy to share with you." And so the king sat down with him at his table, and the man shared his meager meal with the king. And the king said, "How do you get money to earn to buy your food for this meal?" And the man said, "Well, I have some shoe polish that I made for myself and some rags, and I go into the town square every day and I shine people's shoes for them. And they pay me to shine their shoes, and I spend that money on food for the day. And I have enough to take care of me. I have enough to sustain me, and whatever happens, God will take care of me and I'll be fine. So I'm happy." Well, the king went home that night and he thought about it. He thought about what the man had said, and he decided to test the man, to test his happiness. He said, "Suppose something happens unexpected, what will this man do, and will he still be so happy?" So the next morning, an edict went out around the kingdom: no more shoe shining will be allowed. It is now against the law to make money shining people's shoes. From now on, everyone has to shine their own shoes. Well, he wondered what the poor man would do. So the poor man went out that day into the square, and he'd heard about the edict, and he knew he couldn't shine shoes, but he saw some people, some men, going out with axes, going into the forest to chop wood. And he asked if he could join them. And they said, "Certainly." So they gave him an axe, and he went out with them, and he chopped down some wood, and he brought back the wood and sold the wood and kept a little bit of it for himself, for his own fire, and he made enough money to buy his food for the day, and he went home. That evening, the king, dressed as a beggar, went out again and went to the same poor man's house, and he knocked on the door. And the poor man opened the door and said, "Oh, my friend, come in, share my meal with me again." And so the king did. And the king said to him, "I heard that it's now against the law to shine shoes. What did you do today to earn your food?" And so the man told him what he had done and how he had chopped wood for the day. And so that night the king went home and thought about it again. And the next day, a new law was that you could not go into the forest and chop trees. The forests were getting depleted. There weren't enough trees growing, and for now, no more chopping down of trees was going to be allowed. So that next day, the poor man went out and saw that he couldn't chop trees anymore, but he saw that the king had posted a sign saying that the king's guard needed people. So he signed up to be one of the king's guards. He thought, I'll make some money that way. And they gave him a uniform to wear, and they gave him a beautiful, shiny sword and a sheath to wear at his waist. And all day long he marched up and down alongside of the palace, doing his job as a king's guard. Well, the next day he went back. That evening he went to accept his pay for being a king's guard. And he was told, oh, no, that's not the way it works. We don't pay our guards every day. You have to work for a week, and then we give you your pay at the end of the week. Well, what was the man to do? He went home, and he thought, how am I going to buy my food for the next meal? And he thought about it. And he took one of the pieces of wood that he had saved, and he carved out a perfect replica of his sword. And he took the sword, the real sword that he had been issued, and took it into the market square, and he sold it. And he made enough money on that sword for enough food for the entire week. And he put the wooden sword that he had made into his sheath. Well, the next day he went to the palace again and marched back and forth. And at one point, someone came up to him, one of the other guards, and said, "You, there, a man has broken the law. A man has stolen fruit from the trees in the palace garden. And this is against the law. You do not steal fruit from the king. This man should be put to death." That is the rule. That is the law. And since you are the newest guard, it is your job to kill this man. You need to chop off his head with your sword. Well, all the people gathered in the square to see the execution. And the poor man thought, what am I going to do? I no longer have a sword, and I don't want to chop off anyone's head anyway. This is terrible. But he thought about it. He was a very smart man, and he thought. And the moment came, the prisoner was brought before him and put down on his knees. And he was told, now is the time, you must chop off this prisoner's head. Well, the poor man thought for a moment, and he said, I've never killed anyone before. I need some time. I need a moment to pray, to talk to God, and to ask forgiveness for what I am about to do. And he took a moment, and then he said in a voice loud enough for all the people to hear, my God, I must do this thing. If this prisoner is truly guilty and deserves to be killed, may my sword strike true and kill this man in one cut, a painless way to die. But if this prisoner does not deserve to die for his crime, may my sword turn to wood. And he pulled out his sword. A gasp went up among the crowd, for indeed the sword had turned to wood. Well, the king looked at this, and the king started laughing. And the king went over to the poor man, and he introduced himself. He said, I am the king, but you know me better as the beggar who has been coming to your house. Well, the poor man was shocked, and he was frightened. What's going to happen to me now? But the king laughed again and said, you are so wise. You are the wisest person I've ever met. You know how to keep yourself happy no matter what happens, and you knew what to do in this situation. Will you please come live in the palace with me and be my advisor? Of course, the poor man agreed, and he moved into the palace and lived with the king and was, as always, happy forever after.